The dawn was only a faint amber stain on the far edge of the prairie when Eli Cooper, lean, dusty, and known as the most soft-spoken horseman in the Western Territories, guided his stallion, Flint, across the open grassland that rustled like a sea waking from slumber, unaware that this morning would pull him into a story bigger than anything he had ever chosen for himself. He was simply on his way home after a long cattle trade in the south, thinking only of a warm breakfast and the comfort of his quiet barn, when he spotted something impossible in the distance, a massive figure stumbling through the tall grass, limping so heavily that every step sent up a cloud of dust like a wounded bison dragging the weight of a mountain behind him. And as Eli drew closer, he realized the figure was not just big, he was enormous, a towering warrior with shoulders like carved stone and braids thick as rope, each adorned with copper rings and feathers that whispered in the morning breeze. His skin was painted with symbols of strength and ancestry, but it was smeared now with dust and blood, and though he tried to stand proud, his leg buckled beneath him once, twice, until he finally collapsed on one knee, with a low growl of pain that rippled across the plains like thunder trying to break free. Eli slowed Flint and raised a hand in caution, because a man didn't survive long in these lands by rushing toward the unknown, especially not toward a giant warrior who looked capable of throwing a buffalo overhead if he weren't half injured. But when the stranger lifted his head, Eli saw eyes that held neither rage nor threat, only exhaustion, pride fighting against agony, and a wordless plea from someone who did not know how to ask for help. "Friend," Eli called gently, keeping his voice low and even, "you look like you're carrying more pain than a man ought to bear alone." But the giant responded with a sharp shake of his head, refusing pity, refusing weakness, refusing anything that would diminish the steel of his spirit. Yet he could not hide the way his jaw clenched in agony, nor the tremor in his hands as he tried once again to stand and failed. So Eli dismounted slowly, both palms open as a sign of peace, and stepped closer until he could see the truth. An iron bear trap, brutal and rusted, had clamped around the warrior's ankle with teeth meant for predators, not people, and dried blood had already darkened the grass beneath him. "Hold still," Eli murmured. And though the giant gave a grudging nod, his entire body tensed like a storm preparing to strike, and Eli worked the springs, the cruel metal biting at his fingers as he wrestled the trap open inch by inch until it finally released with a metallic screech that echoed across the empty plain. The giant let out a heavy, rumbling breath, not a cry, for he would never allow himself that, but a release of torment that had been locked behind grit and silence, and Eli stepped back respectfully, knowing a warrior's pride was as fragile as his bones were strong. The giant tried to stand again, but his injured leg shook violently, and without waiting for permission, Eli led Flint forward and gently pressed the reins into the warrior's hand. "Take my horse," Eli said simply, and the giant's eyes widened in disbelief because a man's horse was his life, his survival, his pride. Giving it up was an act of trust, so deep that even tribes at war respected it. But Eli saw the man needed Flint more than he did, and that was enough. With slow dignity, the giant mounted, though the strain was visible, and once settled, he looked down at Eli with an expression that carried 100 unspoken promises, as if warriors of his people never forgot the hands that lifted them when they fell. And without a word, he nudged Flint westward, disappearing into the rising sun like an omen of something vast and ancient brushing against the life of a simple rancher. Eli walked the long miles home on foot, thinking only that he had done what any decent man would do, unaware that the plains were already whispering his name, unaware that the warrior he saved was no ordinary traveler but a figure of towering importance among his people, unaware that his small act of mercy had set in motion a chain of events that would reshape his quiet ranching life forever. By the time he reached his barn just as the sun climbed high, he was exhausted but at peace, throwing his jacket over the railing and beginning to tend his tools when the ground began to tremble, first softly, then with the weight of many feet, many bodies, many warriors moving with purpose. And when Eli stepped outside, he froze because an entire warband stood at the edge of his property, their spears tall, their faces painted, their horses massive and disciplined, and at their center sat the giant warrior, now cleaned, straight-backed, and radiating the force of someone who commanded more respect than most chiefs could dream of. Beside him was a young rider carrying a ceremonial staff, and another holding a wrapped object heavy with significance. The giant dismounted Flint, who had been brushed, fed, and adorned with honor beads, and approached Eli with a slow, thunderous dignity, then placed a heavy hand on Eli's shoulder and spoke in a deep voice that carried across the plains like a drumbeat. You gave strength to a warrior when he had none. You gave your horse, your pride, your spirit. Such a gift is not repaid with words but with life bond. Eli blinked, confused, until the warriors parted, revealing a massive wooden chest strapped across 2 pack horses, reinforced with iron bands and traditional carvings glowing in the sunlight. They lifted it and carried it into Eli's barn as if fulfilling an ancient decree, and the giant turned to him again. At sunrise, your barn becomes our vault, our tribute, our protection. Our gold will rest in your walls. Eli's breath caught. Gold? Vault? Protection? Why him? What had he stepped into? The giant
continued, "You saved me. Now we honor you. At dawn your life changes." And, as the warriors began to stack chest after chest of shimmering gold within, the barn, so much wealth it seemed, to bend the light of morning, Eli stood speechless, realizing he had traded one horse for a destiny he had never asked for but could no longer escape. And as the sun rose fully, bathing the barn in blazing gold, the giant turned to Eli once more and declared for all to hear, "From this day, you are friend of the warriors, protector of our treasure, keeper of our bond." Eli's world had transformed in a heartbeat, and he knew that whatever came next, danger, honor, enemies, fortune, it would make one unforgettable story worth sharing with anyone who loved legend, courage, and destiny colliding on the open prairie. And to everyone listening, everyone who craves powerful stories like this, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next chapter of this wild and mighty tale. Eli Cooper was riding home across the quiet prairie when he spotted something impossible. A giant warrior, limping through the tall grass, blood dripping from an iron bear trap clamped around his ankle. The warrior tried to stand proud, but his leg buckled beneath him, and Eli knew he couldn't leave him there to die. With calm hands and a steady voice, Eli forced the rusted trap open, freeing the enormous man whose painted skin and braided hair marked him as someone of great importance. Too weak to walk, the giant refused to show pain, so Eli did the unthinkable. He gave the man his own horse, Flint. The warrior stared at Eli in disbelief, for a cowboy's horse was his life. But something in Eli's quiet courage convinced him to accept the gift. Without a word, he rode off into the sunrise, leaving Eli to walk the long road home. But when Eli reached his ranch, the ground began to tremble. A war band of giant warriors arrived, surrounding his barn. At their center was the same man he had saved, now strong, clean, and commanding the respect of every rider around him. He introduced himself as Tarak, heir of the Iron Sky Warriors, and declared loudly, "You gave your horse to a warrior. At sunrise, we honor your spirit." Before Eli could ask what that meant, the warriors carried in chest after chest of gold, piled high inside his barn until it looked like the sun itself was trapped in the walls. Tarak placed a massive hand on Eli's shoulder and said, "Your barn is now our vault. You are keeper of our treasure, protector of our bond." Eli stood speechless as the gold gleamed around him, realizing he had traded a horse for a destiny he never imagined. And as the warriors rode off, Tarak's voice echoed in his mind, "At sunrise, your life changes." And for viewers who love epic stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter.